As we continue our study of the book of Judges this week, we're actually going to be spending the next 3 weeks with the story of Samson, who is probably the longest single account within that book, and a very interesting one as we look at his story and the way that God worked in his life and the ways that he the way that he lived that out, and not always in the best of ways. But we begin his story with Judges chapter 13, and I'll begin. This is a little bit longer passage. I am trimming a few verses in the middle, just I think still getting the sense of it, but just to keep things a little bit more manageable for our time this morning. But Judges 13, beginning with verse 1, the words will be up on the screen, but I encourage you to follow along in your own Bibles as well. We're told, again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. So the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. A certain man of Zorah, named Manoah, from the clan of the Danites, had a wife who was childless, unable to give birth. The angel of the Lord appeared to her and said, "You are barren and childless, but you are going to become pregnant and give birth to a son. Now see to it that you drink no wine or other fermented drink, and that you do not eat anything unclean. You will become pregnant and have a son whose head is never to be touched by a razor, because the boy is to be a Nazirite, dedicated to God from the womb. He will take the lead in delivering Israel from the hands of the Philistines." Then the woman went to her husband and told him, "A man of God came to me. He looked like an angel of God, very awesome. I didn't ask him where he came from, and he didn't tell me his name. But he said to me, 'You will become pregnant and have a son. Now then, drink no wine or other fermented drink, and do not eat anything unclean, because the boy will be a Nazirite of God from the womb until the day of his death.' Then Manoah prayed to the Lord, 'Pardon your servant, Lord. I beg you to let the man of God you sent to us come again, to teach us how to bring up the boy who is to be born.' God heard Manoah, and the angel of God came again to the woman while she was out in the field, but her husband Manoah was not with her. The woman hurried to tell her husband, 'He's here, the man who appeared to me the other day.' Manoah got up and followed his wife. When he came to the man, he said, 'Are you the man who talked to my wife?' 'I am,' he said. So Manoah asked him, 'When your words are fulfilled, what is to be the rule that governs the boy's life and work?' The angel of the Lord answered, 'Your wife must do all that I have told her. She must not eat anything that comes from the grapevine, nor drink any wine or other fermented drink, nor eat anything unclean. She must do everything I have commanded her.' Then Manoah took a young goat, together with the grain offering, and sacrificed it on a rock to the Lord. And the Lord did an amazing thing while Manoah and his wife watched. As the flame blazed up from the altar toward heaven, the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame. Seeing this, Manoah and his wife fell with their faces to the ground. When the angel of the Lord did not show himself again to Manoah and his wife, Manoah realized that it was the angel of the Lord. 'We are doomed to die,' he said to his wife. 'We have seen God.' But his wife answered, 'If the Lord had meant to kill us, he would not have accepted a burnt offering and grain offering from our hands, nor shown us all these things, or now told this to us.' The woman gave birth to a boy and named him Samson. He grew, and the Lord blessed him, and the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him while he was in Mahaneh-dan, between Zorah and Eshtaol." May God add his blessing to this word. You know, if anyone in the Bible is a superhero, I think we come to the person of Samson. I don't think that's what the S stands for, but you know. Samson demonstrates incredible strength beyond what you would expect an ordinary person to have. We're told of dramatic battles that he has, where he stands up to hundreds of enemies all at once, but also battles of wits. He was a man who loved a riddle and loved to try to outsmart those who were against him. He, at one point, loses his powers only to regain them in a blockbuster victory. It's pretty much like Superman 2 in the diner, you know. Maybe I'm dating myself there. But his story isn't just a hero story. He's not just the Jewish Hercules or something like that. Because as we look at Samson's story, and especially in many ways this first chapter, Samson's story is carefully constructed to show him and his life as a mirror to the nation of Israel as a whole. Both Samson and the nation were brought forth by God's provision. If you remember the story of Israel, Sarah and Rebekah, the matriarchs of Israel, were also barren, just like Samson's mother. But God gave them children to fulfill his promises in their lives and among their family. And in fact, this story of Samson's mother and her barrenness, there are a lot of echoes there, especially of Abraham and Sarah and the messengers of God who came to visit them. Both Samson and Israel were set apart to God. Now, Samson in particular, we're told, was to be under the Nazirite vow of dedication and service to God. Samson is in fact one of 3 people that we're told were Nazirites for their entire lives. The other 2, anybody know who those were? No. That stumped you. One of them comes just a little bit after this in the Bible, in the person of Samson, not Samson, I already said Samson. Samuel starts out the same way. The prophet Samuel was also a Nazirite for his whole life. And then one in the New Testament, a guy who had some pretty weird eating habits. John the Baptist, yes. He was one who was under the Nazirite vow for his whole life. But of course, many other people had the option of taking this vow for a limited period of time to set themselves apart for God. There were certain requirements that you had to follow as part of this vow, and these were things that were supposed to govern Samson's life throughout. One of these that we see repeated here was that they were not to drink wine or strong drink or any grape products, in fact. No raisins for him. It seems that part of the reason for this may have been the same reason that priests were forbidden from drinking wine while they were on service in the temple. And that was so that it was only God's Spirit who was influencing them and not any other sort of intoxicants. Another requirement was that those under the Nazirite vow were to have no contact with the dead, only a connection with life. And this was probably largely to avoid a lot of pagan practices that had cults of the dead and worship of ancestors and other sorts of things that went with that. And finally, no cutting of hair. This is something the angel mentions to Samson's mother. Not to cut their hair during the duration of the vow, which in Samson's case, we think of his long hair because of that. But also, you think of that if you picture the prophet Samuel, if you picture John the Baptist, they should probably have had, hair coming down most of the way down their back as well, because they were under that same vow. This was a visible sign of the vow that they had taken, so everybody knew that they had done this. But again, it also seems that this was to avoid certain pagan practices for the nations around Israel, to show that these people who had taken the vow were set apart to God and God alone. Now, what's really interesting about Samson's life, and we'll look at this in the next couple of weeks, is that Samson breaks all 3 of the requirements of his vow. He has a wedding feast in Philistine territory that's described using the same terms that are used for a drinking party. So it's almost certain that he was consuming a good amount of wine at that party. He has frequent contact with animal corpses throughout his story. Well, next week we'll be looking at this riddle he tells about a lion that he kills and later goes back to the carcass. He kills a number of Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey. And in fact, he's killing a lot of people and has contact with a lot of dead people as a result. And then, of course, famously, near the end of his story, his hair is cut. And it's interesting that it's only at that point that God's strength leaves him. Israel also was set apart to God. The law was to make them holy. Their practices were to set them apart from the nations around them. They were to look different so that others would be drawn to God. But unfortunately, just like Samson, they fall into temptation and fall into conflict with the people around them. Israel was led astray by the gods and religious practices of the Canaanite peoples, as we've been seeing through this whole story. So God gave his people over once again to be oppressed by them, this time the Philistines, who will keep coming back to trouble the Israelites for generations. Samson was a response to that Philistine oppression. He would in fact go on to begin to save Israel from them. But you know, Samson was also led astray by the very people that he was called to save Israel from. He spent a lot of time hanging out in Philistine territory. He married a Philistine wife. He slept with a Philistine prostitute, probably a shrine prostitute at one of their temples. He became ensnared by Delilah, who was probably a Philistine herself, or at least sold him to the Philistines. So both Samson and Israel had these troubling connections to the people that they were supposed to be a witness to. And Samson's story, just like Israel's, has very tragic elements to it. There's unfulfilled potential in Samson's story, maybe more so than almost anybody else in the pages of Scripture. Samson had this great strength. He had the Spirit of God stir him and come upon him, and yet he squandered so much of what he had been given by God. We're told in the NIV, it says that he will take the lead in saving God's people from the Philistines. But another way of translating that would be, he will begin to save his people from the Philistines. Many people wonder, could Samson have completed the task if he had only been faithful? Both Samson and Israel face the tragedy of broken vows, broken covenants with God. They both succumb to temptation and depravity, to vengeance and to evil. But Samson's story, just like Israel's story, is also a story of great hope. It's a story of God's great mercy and faithfulness, even when his people are not, and God's ultimate plan of redemption is shown through both. Of course, at the beginning, what we were reading today, the story is not focused on the strength of Samson. In fact, that isn't even mentioned anywhere in this chapter. Our focus instead is on a very ordinary couple, on Manoah and his wife. And she isn't even named, but like Deborah and Jael before her in the book of Judges, in that history, she is in many ways the hero of this part of the story, this first act of Samson's story. So I'd like us to see what her story shows us about our story, about the way that God's grace can make the weak strong. The first thing I think we see as we look at this story is that grace undoes our shame. It's important, I think, for us to understand as we look at the story of Manoah and his wife, to see that barrenness was something that was shameful within the ancient world. The primary role that most women had was to bear children, to raise them, to continue the family line. Because in fact, children were the retirement. They were the social security of the ancient world. If you didn't have children, there was nobody to care for you in old age. And so if a woman was barren, that was seen in many ways as judgment from God. You must have sinned if God is not allowing you to have children. But the angel has an amazing message for Manoah's wife. Notice what he says to her. You are barren and childless. You are. He doesn't dance around the reality of the situation. She probably did not want to talk about this. Certainly not with a stranger who just showed up in her field. It was the one thing she would not have wanted people to notice about her, but the one thing everybody knew. But this angel, this stranger, identifies the source of her shame and just states it very matter-of-factly. You are barren and childless. And it occurs to me that there is a great disarming power in naming our shame. We all have shame as fallen people in a broken world. It might be something outside our control, something that we still feel shame about. It may be something that we did, a sin, just a bad decision, a foolish mistake that we made. It may be something that other people tear us down over, or it might be something that nobody else knows. Sometimes it's something we don't even want to think of as something shameful. Sometimes it's something that our culture might even celebrate. Notice the angel, as part of this, kind of to that point, the angel needs to reinforce to Manoah's wife several times to avoid unclean foods. You would think for a good Jewish family that wasn't something that you would have to reinforce. Of course they're going to stay away from unclean foods, the ones that God had prohibited in the law. But I think it speaks to the time. It speaks maybe to Manoah's wife as well, that God's law was not being generally observed in Israel. So he had to reinforce, keep away from these things that will make you unclean. Even if they are things that we don't see as shameful, there is a moral law. Our opinion of that doesn't change it. As we read in Philippians chapter 3, as I have often told you before and now tell you again, even with tears, many live as enemies of the cross of Christ. Their destiny is destruction, their God is their stomach, and their glory is in their shame. But whatever your shame, whatever might cause that in your life, there is a disarming power in naming it, in bringing it out into the daylight and showing it for what it is, no better and no worse. But most importantly, the angel doesn't stop there. You are barren and childless, but you are going to become pregnant and give birth to a son. You are, but you will become. He doesn't stop with who she is, with what she might not have been able to do, but he goes on to focus on what she will become. She will become pregnant. She will become a mother. She will bear a son and an heir, and he will be set apart and have a powerful purpose from God. In the same way, God stepped into our story to take away our shame, whatever that may be. In Hebrews 12, we read, "For the joy set before him, Jesus, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God." And then in 1 Peter, quoting the prophet Isaiah, "See, I lay a stone in Zion, a chosen and precious cornerstone, and the one who trusts in him will never be put to shame." He took the shame and the death of our sin, yours and mine, on himself on the cross. We couldn't take that away, but he will do so. He has done so. And we just have to put our trust in him So grace undoes our shame. Second, grace answers our doubts. Manoah's wife may have struggled with shame, but God in his strength undoes that, and he gives her and her husband hope. And they believe him. Manoah prays in verse 8 of that chapter, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I beg you to let the man of God you sent to us come again to teach us how to bring up the boy who is to be born." He believes right away that this boy will be born. Even before they knew for sure that this was an angel, somehow he still has insight, he still has faith to know that this was a message from God and it could be trusted. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't have doubts. Notice his prayer, "Come back and tell us how to be good parents to this boy." That would be really nice, wouldn't it? Everybody who's a parent? God, come back and tell me how I'm supposed to raise this child. I think every parent has probably prayed that at some point or other. Manoah and his wife doubt whether they can follow through with what the angel has told them, with this responsibility that he has put on them. He tries to show hospitality to this man, tries to learn his name. I think he wants to find out more about who this is. He might be second-guessing a little bit here, wondering if this stranger can really be trusted. But notice, despite the doubts that Manoah may have had, God sends the angel back anyway. He doesn't berate them for having some doubts or having some hesitation. He shows up to reassure them, to make sure that they are pointed in the right direction. And he gives them a sign. The angel disappears in the flame of the fire of their offering so that they would know that that was really a message from God, so they would have that reassurance. This, I think, is a powerful reminder to us that even after you have trusted Jesus to take away your sin and your shame, you are still going to have doubts from time to time. What does God really want me to do? Does he really want me? Am I up for the task? The Apostle James wrote, "If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you." And Paul prayed for the church in Thessalonica, "May our Lord Jesus Christ himself and God our Father, who loved us and by his grace gave us eternal encouragement and good hope, encourage your hearts and strengthen you in every good deed and word." Manoah and his wife are a reminder to us of God's grace when we doubt. We can go to him in honesty. We can ask him for his wisdom. We can find eternal encouragement and hope in his grace. Because in his grace, he will encourage our hearts. He will provide what we need to live out the calling that he has given to us. I've heard said many times, God doesn't usually call the equipped. He equips the called. I've seen that in my own life so many ways, and in many others' lives as well. So grace undoes our shame. Grace answers our doubts. Finally, grace gives us strength. Because we might be asking, okay, we're supposed to live out this calling that he has given to us, but how? How do we do that? Like Manoah, we find ourselves asking, come back. Tell us what we are supposed to do. How do we raise this child? How do we live out this calling that you have given to us? God graciously sent the angel back to Manoah and his wife. But notice what he says to them. He just points them back to what he'd already told them. I told you already. No grapes, no booze, don't eat anything unclean. I have to wonder if that seemed like a disappointment to them. God, we asked you for more detail. Why are you withholding information? Tell us more about what we're supposed to do. But God's message was, I have told you what you need to know. I often want more specifics from God. God, tell me what you want me to do. Tell me how you want me to do it. But very often, most of the time, instead of giving me something brand new, a voice in the night, the Holy Spirit points me back to His Word. Do what I have already told you to do. Micah 6:8 came to mind. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. Don't just follow ritual, but walk humbly with God. Act with justice. Love mercy for those around you. And then when the angel vanishes, Manoah finally realizes that this was no ordinary man. He's terrified. He's sure that they are going to die because they have seen the angel of God. Now, that's not an unusual reaction to being in the presence of God. Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and others had that same reaction when they saw their own sin in contrast to the holiness of the one who was before them. But you notice what his wife says? She very well might have said to him, I told you he looked like an angel. In fact, her response to him, I think, is made to make us laugh. Come on, buddy. If the Lord had meant to kill us, he wouldn't have accepted the burnt offering, the grain offering from our hands. He wouldn't have shown us all these things. He wouldn't have told us these things. Pull yourself together, man. Husbands in the room, how often has your wife been that role in your life? Yeah. There's great wisdom in her words. God has revealed himself to us. He has accepted our offerings. He has shown us his plan. So why would he do that just to turn his back on us, just to kill us? I think she has wisdom and strength because she really saw God and his grace. She had experienced God taking away her shame. And in his grace, Jesus takes away our shame. In his grace, he answers our doubts. And in his grace, he gives us something to do, and he will give us the strength to do it. Returning again to Hebrews chapter 12, the writer says, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. Like Manoah's wife, we are called to live a set-apart life. You notice that she was to follow the requirements of the vow through the course of her pregnancy. She was called to be set apart, not just her son. We are called to live a set-apart life, to throw off anything that hinders us from his purposes in our lives. We are called to persevere, to live out that salvation that he has given to us. But he doesn't leave us to do that in our own strength. We're told, keep looking to him, the pioneer and the perfecter of our faith. Like Manoah's wife, when you see him, you'll see his grace. And you can trust that he will fulfill all of his good purposes for you. as you go in this week, as we continue in worship, let's go before him and ask him for reminders of his grace.